About 4,000 years ago, deep in the jungles, there stood an empire that counted the stars in space without the use of modern telescopes. Their mathematical science was so perfect that even NASA is amazed today. But the question is, with all this knowledge, so much power, and sky-high 020 after building the pyramids, where did 10 million people suddenly disappear one day? Why did their calendar predict the end of the world in 2012? And their definition of beauty was so terrifying that today's people would shudder to hear it. This Mayan civilization was full of bloodthirsty gods, human sacrifices, and lost cities of gold. How did such a great civilization begin? And how did it suddenly collapse? The story begins in 1839. This was a time when this part of the world map, in the middle of America, was considered almost empty. It was believed that it was impossible for humans to live in the deadly jungle here. There was only malaria, poisonous snakes, and death. But the two explorers, John Lloyd Stevens and Frederick Catherode, were not afraid of these dangers. The local indigenous people told them stories of old stone houses that no one believed. They entered the remote jungle of Honduras where the sunlight did not reach the ground. Unknown dangers awaited them at every step. Week after week, they almost gave up due to fatigue and illness. Then, while clearing the forest, their axes hit something solid. As they cleared away the centuries-old moss and undergrowth, the ground gave way from under their feet. It was no ordinary stone. It was a pillar, on which was written something in an unknown language. When they looked up, in front of them stood not a jungle, but a huge stone temple. It was the city of 𝐒𝐿𝐫, a city as huge as the pyramids of Egypt, but hidden from the world. This discovery shocked the whole world. It was lost for thousands of years, but one of the most advanced civilizations of its time was the Maya civilization. If we see them in the world today, it would have spread to the areas of present-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. At the same time that Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were going on in India, and the cities of Mesopotamia were being developed, around 2000 BC, that is, 4,000 years ago, this civilization was taking root in this deep jungle on the other side of the world. But until the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists had very limited ideas. We thought there were just a few temples in the jungle where people would come and go to worship. We thought their population was very small, but we were wrong, and it took us more than 100 years to correct this mistake. In 2018, science invented a technology that can see through walls. The technology is called LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Scientists flew a plane with a LiDAR scanner over the jungle of northern Guatemala. The machine fired billions of laser pulses at the ground. The beams scanned the ground through the gaps in the trees and created a 3D map. When the computer processed the data and removed the trees, the scene that emerged blew the scientists' minds. What we thought was empty jungle was actually a Meghalaya police station, or a huge metropolis. There were more than 60,000 buildings buried there. We estimated that there were several 100,000 people living here. But LiDAR proved that the Mayan civilization had more than 10 million people living there. That is, a much larger population than any country in Europe at that time. We were surprised to know this. But then a big question arose before scientists. When the great civilizations of the world were developing about 4,000 years ago, there was one thing in common. All those civilizations were developed on the banks of rivers. For example, the Indus Valley civilization, near the Indus and Satara rivers, and the Mesopotamian civilization, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. But the story of the Maya civilization was a little different. If you look at the map carefully, there were no rivers in a large part of their empire. The soil there was made of limestone. This stone is like a sponge. So the question is, how could 10 million people settle in such a place? Why did they decide to build a sky-high building in a place that was no less than a desert, where there was no water for cultivation, where the soil was barren? How did they build a sky-high building? Did they run away and hide in this forest out of fear? Or did they find some secret technology to defeat nature, which the rest of the world did not have? So let's go deep into this jungle. To find out why the Mayans settled in that deadly jungle, we have to go back a little bit. Not just 4,000 years ago, but 20,000 years ago. This was during the Ice Age. The whole world was covered in ice. The sea level had dropped so low that the water between Asia and America had frozen over. This was the route through which a group of people in search of prey left Asia and entered a new world. This world was America. It was not a country like America today, but rather a deserted jungle. These people kept moving. For thousands of years, generations after generations, they kept moving south to escape the cold. They crossed the vast deserts of North America. They crossed the mountains of Mexico. They could have lived anywhere they wanted. But as they moved, these people reached the Yucatan Peninsula in Central America.